If you're here, I'm going to assume that, like me, you grew up adoring the Transformers cartoon. But even as a kid, you must have sensed there was something much darker rumbling beneath the scenes than just huge robots fighting each other. If you had that irk, you were not alone. And it's a well-established fact now that this 1984-87 series wasn't just another Saturday morning show. I mean, the Transformers cartoons played with heavy adult stuff, like loss of willpower, racial overtones, sadism, and child endangerment, to name a few. And in this video, I'm going to take you through 10 of the darkest and most adult examples that the Transformers cartoon hid under its mechanical cloak. And now, let's begin. Nonsense. Optimus Prime's death traumatized a generation. Nothing prepared us for the 1986 Transformers the movie. In the opening act, beloved Autobot leader Optimus Prime is mortally wounded in brutal combat with Megatron. I remember watching in disbelief as Optimus turned grey and lifeless on the operating table. And if I'm being honest, well, it felt like the heart of the series had been ripped out. And the thing is, I wasn't alone in this insane grief that had presented itself to me. Because you see, kids in theatres wept like, well, they wept like kids, and some were so distraught they wouldn't come out of their bedrooms afterward. This behaviour from kids eventually led to backlash from parents, which was massive. Hasbro received a flood of letters demanding Optimus Prime's return, and the show's writers scrambled to respond. They did bring him back at the end of Season 3, but in possibly the darkest way imaginable. In the episode Dark Awakening, Optimus is resurrected as a mind-controlled zombie, programmed by evil Quintessons to betray the Autobots. Seeing our hero with blank eyes attacking his own friends was also disturbing. Although Optimus eventually breaks free of the programming and sacrifices himself, again, by blowing up his own ship to save everyone, it was too heavy to sustain as a young adolescent, and with the tears of Daniel Witwicky, many other thousands of young kids flowed all over again when Optimus died a second time. Hasbro ultimately learned its lesson. They resurrected Optimus for good in the return of Optimus Prime 2-parter, and with this they basically admitted that killing him off had been a terrible mistake. But for those of us who lived through it, well, the damage was done. I mean, Optimus Prime's death had already scarred an entire generation of kids. Galvatron, a sadistic, abusive tyrant. I think it's a well-established fact in the Transformer circles that if Megatron was a bully, his reincarnation Galvatron was an absolute monster. After being reborn from Megatron by the planet-eater Unicron in the 1986 movie, Galvatron turned out to be someone totally and absolutely unhinged, and he was exponentially more violent, paranoid, and cruel than his predecessor. In his very first scene, executes Starscream by disintegrating the treacherous lieutenant to ash in front of everyone. More on that later. Season 3 of the show drives home how sadistic Galvatron is. Having been driven insane by a plasma bath, he routinely lashes out at his own troops. When Cyclonus and the Sweeps risk their lives to rescue him from Planet Thrall's lava, then, in a fit of pure rage, he destroys the entire planet of Thrall as he departs. He blows up an entire world simply because he can. In 5 Faces of Darkness, we see Galvatron demonstrate his power by using his cannon to ignite a planet's atmosphere in a cataclysmic blast. His leadership style is basically to rule through fear and brutality. And if you happen to be a Decepticon who fails him, or even speaks out of turn, you pretty much run the risk of being obliterated on the spot. There's a palpable tension in many scenes where Galvatron's minions flinch and wonder if their leader will snap and kill them for sport. Even his own lieutenants whisper that Galvatron's behavior is anything but sane, and some Sweeps fear that he might turn on them next. If you don't remember, Sweeps are basically the minions of Scourge, created by Unicron. Moving on, unlike Megatron, who was ruthless but somewhat rational, Galvatron is a tyrant in the purest sense, and he uses terror as his only tool. Someone who did actually scare me, personally. Sparkplug gets enslaved by a mind-controlled chip. Early in the series, the writers introduced a storyline that in hindsight is pretty disturbing. Allow me to explain. So, in the 3-part arc called The Ultimate Doom, the bad guys, aka the Decepticons, kidnap Sparkplug Witwicky, who is the father of Spike, who we know is the young human friend of Autobots. Now, instead of holding Sparkplug for ransom, the Decepticon scientist named Dr. Arkeville implants a hypnochip in Sparkplug's head, which effectively erases the man's free will and turns him into a mindless slave. Sparkplug is forced to cheerfully obey Megatron's commands, which obviously included sabotaging the Autobots from within. But here's what makes the case of Mr. Witwicky darker than previously believed. You see, he was just a pilot test. Megatron and Dr. Arkeville actually intended to enslave humanity at large using these hypnochips so that Earth's entire population could be robbed of their free will. Eventually, Sparkplug is freed after Wheeljack invents a device to remove the chip, and in the aftermath, he tearfully apologizes to his son Spike for the things he did while brainwashed. But the strange thing is that after everything came back to normalcy, Sparkplug disappeared from the show entirely without any explanation whatsoever. None. Nada. Zilch. After season 2, he's never seen again. The 1986 movie time jumped 20 years into the future, and Sparkplug was simply gone. As a kid, I didn't really wait a lot for them to mention what happened to him, but as an adult, I want to know whatever happened to Sparkplug. I mean, did he die? Retire? Did aliens take him away? What exactly happened? One might assume the worst, but the truth is, the writers simply dropped his character. Either way, season 1 introduced body horror and loss of autonomy in a way that I didn't fully understand as a child, but now it feels like the kids' cartoon version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Child endangerment is completely normalized. Speaking of Spike, I have to highlight how insane it is that the show constantly put a child, or at best a teenager, in mortal danger, as if it's no big deal. Spike Witwicky is roughly 14 years old when the series starts, right? And yet, he's working on an oil rig, fighting alien robots and getting kidnapped every other week. The Autobots essentially treat him as one of the team, and don't give two shits about sending him into battle zones and enemy bases regularly. In one episode, Spike and Bumblebee are captured by the Decepticons and nearly sent through an experimental space bridge to who knows where. And to make things worse, Megatron literally uses Spike as a test subject for a dangerous teleportation device. In another instance, Spike is taken to Cybertron, while his mind-controlled father simply asks him to obey the Decepticons. I mean, come on, you're not Pennywise, and your daughter isn't Ingrid Kirsch, so what's with the down, dead eyes? Thankfully, Spike survives all this, but the fact is that the show's heroes continually allow a minor to be placed in life-threatening situations. By season 3, Spike's about 35 and has a son of his own named Daniel. And guess what? Daniel then becomes the new kid in danger. The Transformers movie itself has Daniel nearly devoured by mechanized piranhas, and if that wasn't enough, the poor child sees his friends die around him. Watching as an adult, I was actually bewildered by how casually the cartoon treated abduction, combat trauma, and even torture of its young characters. It's presented as high adventure, but if you stop and think about it, poor Spike endures experiences that would result in lifetime therapy for any real kid and a shit ton of PTSD. The writers clearly wanted a relatable human character for us to identify with, but in doing so, they turned Spike into a perennial damsel in distress. Spike becomes a robot, body horror for kids. If the whole hypno-chip thing wasn't enough, the show found another way to subject Spike to a fate that I, for one, would call worse than death, although some of you might disagree. So what happens is that in the season 2 episode titled Autobot Spike, our teenage hero is critically injured during a Decepticon attack. The Autobots, desperate to save his life, decide to transfer Spike's consciousness into a robot body while his human body heals. This new body is called Autobot X, which is basically a mishmash monstrosity made of spare robot parts. And if you think about it, this version of Spike walks the same path as Frankenstein's monster, does he not? When Spike awakens in this huge and rather distorted robot form, he reacts with confusion, then terror, and then rage. Of course, he lashes out in a berserk panic, because he's unable to cope with the existential horror of being neither human nor Autobot. In Autobot X's body, he looks in a mirror and realizes that he's a monster. In fact, he even watches a Frankenstein film and starts calling himself a metal monster. He then goes on a rampage, runs away for a while, and even joins Megatron. As a kid, it was somewhat difficult for me to understand why, but now I can. I mean, it's body horror, plain and simple. The idea of your mind being stuck in an alien body, losing control of your impulses, hurting the people you love is the stuff of nightmares. And the thing is, the show didn't resolve things for Robot Spike, and the Autobots simply managed to subdue him and transfer his mind back to his repaired human body by the end. So yeah, I'm impressed the writers had the nerve to do a full-on psychological horror episode. Starscream's obliteration and ghostly fate. For all his scheming, Starscream was a bit of comic relief in early seasons. I'm not sure if you remember, but he was an arrogant second-in-command who often got slapped down by Megatron. But in the movie and season 3, Starscream's story went all berserk and upside down. So, during Transformers the movie, Starscream finally seizes leadership of the Decepticons for about 5 minutes. As he's crowning himself, the resurrected Megatron, now Galvatron, shows up to settle the score. Galvatron transforms into cannon mode and blasts Starscream at point-blank range, and quite literally turns him into dust. We see Starscream's body crumble and disintegrate into a pile of ash, with only his empty metal feet remaining on the throne, and then topple over with a clank. It's a shocking final death, or so we thought. Season 3 then reintroduces Starscream in a creepy new form. Yeah, so they basically turn him into a Cybertronian ghost thanks to an undead spark. Starscream's spirit persists as an invisible, bodiless entity. It's conscious but unable to affect the physical world unless he possesses someone. He appears in episodes like Starscream's Ghost and Ghost in the Machine as a phantom seeking revenge. The implication is that Galvatron's blast was so powerful it annihilated Starscream's physical form, but his spark or soul was left wandering. For a kid-friendly show, this is incredibly deep and maybe even macabre, as it introduces the idea of a tortured afterlife. Starscream himself laments being stuck in limbo. He can witness events but not fully participate unless he takes over another Transformer's body, which he does on occasion, to the terror of whoever he possesses. As an adult, I find it fascinating as in, well, the lore of Transformers actually accommodates undead robots, but it is undeniably dark. We went from colourful laser battles to questions of metaphysical existence beyond death. The blatantly racist Carbomia episode. Not all the darkness in Transformers was of the fun sci-fi variety, and one bit was just offensive. In Season 3, the writers introduced a fictional Middle Eastern nation called Carbomia. Yeah, that really was the name. The very name Carbomia is an awful pun referencing car bomb terrorism, and kinda sounds like a car is gonna bomb you, which clearly pokes fun at Middle Eastern countries, and the depiction only gets worse from there. Carbomia is ruled by a buffoonish despot, Abdul Fakadi, who was a caricature of Libya's late ruler, Muammar Gaddafi. Needless to say, every bad 1980s Arab stereotype was on full display. Fakadi wears flowing robes and a keffiyeh, waves an AK-47 around, and boasts about being president for life, king of kings and all-around supreme leader of Carbomia. The country's welcome sign literally says, population 4,000 people and 10,000 camels. Characters from Carbomia speak in an exaggerated Arab accent, spouting lines like, "By the beard of the Prophet," and making oaths on the graves of my mother's camels. The entire portrayal is played for cheap laughs, leaning into the stereotype of Arabs as either comic opera tyrants or backward camel herders. Even as a kid, one could sense something was off. These scenes felt mean-spirited and jarring compared to the rest of the show. In the story, Carbomia is basically used as a hiding place for the Decepticons, since it's an anti-Western nation that would harbor giant robots, apparently. But honestly, the plot is secondary to the sheer offensiveness of the setting. It's an episode I'm embarrassed by on behalf of a show I otherwise love. To make matters worse, Transformers aired during a time of real-world tension in the Middle East, the mid-80s, and instead of rising above cheap jokes, the writers went for the lowest denominator. Carbomia is a stain on G1 Transformers and will forever remain an example of outdated racism that the series' own creators later regretted. Kasem quit over the racist writing. The Carbomia debacle had real fallout behind the scenes. Legendary radio personality Kasem, who voiced several characters on Transformers, and most importantly the Autobot Cliffjumper and Teletron 1 computer, was of Lebanese descent. He was deeply upset by the caricature of Arabs in Thief in the Night. Kasem was so offended that he protested to the production team and ultimately quit the show in protest. According to writer Flint Dilley, Kasem even tried to get the script's writer fired over it. At a minimum, he demanded that the series include some positive portrayals of Middle Eastern characters to counterbalance the stereotype. The producers didn't oblige, so Kasem followed through on his principles and walked away. This was pretty shocking at the time, as Kasem was a high-profile voice actor, and losing him meant writing out his Transformers characters. After Kasem left, Cliffjumper's character was phased out of the show. Decades later, Flint Dilley admitted Kasem had a point. In an appearance at a convention, Dilley acknowledged that Transformers had portrayed all Arabs as villains and stereotypes, with no positive examples, and he termed that a real mistake. I actually respect Kasem a lot for what he did. It's not easy to give up on a gig on principle, but he felt he couldn't be part of something that denigrated his heritage. Mind control and psychological abuse everywhere. Beyond the big dramatic moments and controversial episodes, there was an undercurrent of psychological horror throughout Transformers. Physical violence was the norm, sure, lasers and explosions every episode. But what really made the Decepticons scary was how they loved to mess with minds. I've already talked about Sparkplug's enslavement via hypnochip, which was a prime example of removing someone's free will. That theme comes up again and again. The Insecticon Bombshell, for instance, is literally a master of mind control, because he fires cerebral shell implants that let him puppeteer the minds of both humans and other Transformers. Bombshell takes sadistic glee in forcing his victims to betray their friends and act against their own will. Even his fellow Decepticons are uneasy around him, knowing he could turn his powers on them, and that's how malicious the psychological warfare gets. Megatron, too, frequently uses deception, brainwashing devices, and psychological ploys. In the episode Attack of the Autobots, Megatron manages to mind control the Autobots themselves and pretty much turns Optimus and company into evil versions of themselves who nearly kill their human allies. Throughout the series, characters are hypnotized, reprogrammed, or mentally manipulated in various diabolical ways. As a child, I mostly cared about who punched who, but upon rewatching, I see the darker layers and themes. I mean, the show consistently explores the horror of losing autonomy. There's something far more disturbing about a character being forced to act against their nature than there is about a simple explosion. It introduces young viewers to the concept of identity erasure, which is heavy stuff for a toy cartoon, and if you ask me, is pretty heavy stuff even for us adults. In a way, Transformers smuggled in some psychological thriller elements under the guise of a sci-fi action show, and the terror wasn't just that the heroes might be destroyed, it was that they might lose their very souls. A production on the brink. Errors, chaos, and exhaustion. Perhaps the darkest of the dark facts about the Transformers is all that drama that happened behind the scenes. The show was enormously popular, but it was also a commercial driven by toy releases, which meant the production was constantly under impossible deadlines. New characters meant new toys, and they had to be introduced at a breakneck pace. Meanwhile, episodes had to air in sync with store shelves. Animators and writers were pushed to the limit. The series was animated largely in Japan and South Korea on a rushed schedule, and the resulting episodes are riddled with errors. I'm talking about every episode having some visual mistake or continuity flub. The producers often knew about these errors, but simply had no time to fix them before airtime. We're talking about colouring mistakes, like you'd sometimes see Optimus Prime turning purple. Characters would appear in scenes they shouldn't, and sometimes even dead guys came on screen. For example, the Autobot Huffer randomly appeared alive in an episode after his death. Sometimes Transformers would be drawn at the wrong scale, their limbs would vanish, you name it. As kids, maybe you noticed some of it, but you mostly roll with it. The animators were doing miracles given the time crunch, but the cracks showed. Moreover, the voice recording process was intense. Legend has it that voice director Wally Burr was a relentless taskmaster who would make the actors do take after take until they were perfect. Sessions ran so long and got so heated that some voice actors literally lost consciousness or collapsed from vocal strain. After all, they were shouting battle cries and doing raspy monster voices for hours on end. The writers, meanwhile, had to implement last-minute changes whenever Hasbro decreed something. For example, if a toy's name had to change for legal reasons, the script had to reflect that, often with awkward results. The show we love was in reality held together with duct tape and, well, panic. In hindsight, this anarchical production, if you will, became its own kind of meta-story. But I also have a lot of respect for the people who made this show under these conditions. The fact that it turned out as entertaining and iconic as it did is kind of miraculous. It's as if the turmoil and desperation behind the scenes somehow translated into a manic energy on screen, a toy commercial straining so hard to be epic that it occasionally broke apart at the seams. No, that was not a metaphor. The seams were literally showing on screen. Marvelous verdict. If you ask me, revisiting these dark and adult elements of the Transformers has been something of an eye-opening experience for me. As a child, a lot of it went over my head or was processed as cool or sad without fully grasping the implications. As an adult, well, I can appreciate how bold and sometimes misguided the show really was. It wasn't afraid to traumatize kids with hero death and body horror, to depict truly deranged villainy, or even to flirt with social controversy. And it did all of that in the guise of a cartoon about selling toys. And you know what? Those heavy elements are part of why we're still talking about Transformers today. Yeah, the show didn't always handle things gracefully, but it didn't talk down to its audience. It assumed kids could handle darkness, perhaps too much darkness at times, and it became a shared experience for those of us who lived through it. A shared experience that's hard to shake off, might I add.